Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dario Health. Manage your blood glucose levels, increase your possibilities. By Gvoke HypoPen, the first premixed auto-injector for very low blood sugar. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
This week, Don Muchow just finished an incredible run from California's Disneyland all the way across the country to Disney World in Florida. Diagnosed with type 1 as a child, Don wasn't always an athlete. In his early 40s, he decided to try working out, but then he got some bad news. His eyes were in trouble. It
was like a punch in the gut to get that laser retinopathy treatment after I had made the decision to be healthy. And I made myself a promise that if I could just have a do-over, I would do it over. And I've just kind of not looked back since then.
He definitely has not. Don is 59, and he has yet another big goal. I'm so excited to share his story. In our innovations segment, a 7-day pump inset, and some of our favorites have a little fun with a donut demonstration. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. If you are new, welcome. My son was diagnosed with type 1 back in 2006, right before he turned 2. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have any type of diabetes. I spent my career in broadcasting, and that is how you get the podcast. My guest this week, oh my goodness, is Don Muchow. He made national news last week when he finished a coast-to-coast run. He calls himself a type 1 diabetic extreme ultra runner and Ironman. Boy, is he ever. I wanted to read you a couple of highlights from Don's website. So here's what he did before the accomplishment we're going to talk about today. In 2019, he ran across Texas. He holds the fastest known time record for doing that. In 2018, he completed Relay Iowa, which is 339 miles, Sioux City to Dubuque. First ever solo finisher of the longest U.S. relay, first ever T1D finisher. 2017 Capital to Coast race, 223 miles. Austin, Texas to the Gulf of Mexico, first ever T1D solo finisher, and on and on and on. I will link up Don's website over at diabetes-connections.com and in the show notes. And do yourself a favor, because that wasn't even a quarter of the list of stuff that he has accomplished. And as you heard, he was not always an athlete. His story is even more amazing when you find out that when Don was diagnosed in 1972, he was told no exercise, too dangerous with type 1. Not even gym class. He was not allowed to take gym class. I will let Don tell you how he overcame that type of thinking to become the incredible athlete that he is now. And he has great advice for those of us who want to be more active, but are not ever going to run across Texas, let alone across the country. And that is coming up in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dario. Bottom line, you need a plan of action with diabetes. We have been very lucky that Benny's Endo has helped us with that, and that he understands the plan has to change as Benny gets older. You want that kind of support, so take your diabetes management to the next level with Dario Health. Their published studies demonstrate high-impact results for active users, like improved in-range percentage within 3 months, reduction of A1C within 3 months, and a 58% decrease in occurrences of severe hyperglycemic events. Try Dario's Diabetes Success Plan and make a difference in your diabetes management. Go to mydario.com/diabetes connections for more proven results and for information about the plan. Don, thank you so much for making some time with me. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
How are you feeling this morning?
Hungry and tired.
My goodness. You know, I'm not sure where to begin because there's so much to your story, but I guess let's start with my biggest question. And I always have this for people who are ultra athletes and do these incredible feats. Can you tell us why you would do something like this? When did the idea enter your brain that this was a thing you wanted to do?
We started thinking about the run about 3 years ago, and our primary objective was to get the word out to other type 1s who are living with the disease that while exercise can be justifiably scary because low blood sugars can lead to seizures, unconsciousness, even death, the long-term complications from avoiding it entirely, as I had done for the first 30 or so years since my diagnosis, are really pretty awful when compared to the remote possibility of a trip to the ER for an incredibly low blood sugar. Wow. And it's the snake in the room that you have to face. You can't ignore it, and you can't freak out about it.
Well, you said we and our there. Tell me about your team before we go any further.
I often tell people somewhat jokingly that I just do the running and my wife and crew chief, Leslie, does everything else. That's actually pretty close to true. I started calling her mission control once we got closer to the Space Coast.
That's great. With a run like this, and I want to talk about, other feats that you have done, and you already mentioned you went so long without regular exercise. There's so much to this story. With this run, what did you think? Because you started this, COVID really threw you for a loop. We'll get into that. But when you were starting out, what was the plan?
We had spent probably about a year getting the route laid out so that it was safe enough to do. We were conscious of the fact that some people might want to do that same route again, and the last thing we wanted was for someone to die trying. When we started thinking about sort of putting feet on the ground, we went out and scouted the route in the car and made sure that I was comfortable with the terrain and with the route that I would be running. And we still ran into obstacles, but it sort of helped us get our mind around the idea of what it would be like to run across the country.
Wow. What kind of things do you look for when you're scouting it out? Is it road type? Is it towns? Is it able to drive on?
You're right on all three of those. We wanted a route that I could run, that the van could drive as well. Wouldn't be much use, especially with type 1, if I ran 800 miles of trail in Arizona and there's no way to find me. So we wanted a route with wide shoulders, relatively low traffic, that the van could drive most of. When we were in metropolitan areas that had bike trails, that was the one exception where we just kind of let me run on the trails because I could always pop out to a CVS or a gas station or something like that.
And why Disney to Disney? Was that geographic? Are you a fan?
I am a fan. My wife and I are both big fans. Disney has been credited for saying something about how if you can dream it, you can do it. And that seemed like a sort of an anthemic statement, but really the actual route from Disney to Disney was a bit of a happy accident. We had originally planned to run basically from LA to the Space Coast, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, well, so you're running from Disneyland to Disney World." and I didn't have that idea, but that is brilliant. We decided to switch it up just a little bit to do the Disney to Disney piece inside the transcontinental run.
Very cool. Oh, that's great. So you started out, I remember when you put your feet on the ground and got going. And at that time, COVID was not really a thought. When did you realize that you were going to have to make some changes?
That occurred to me I think it was about end of the second week of March of 2020, when we were making a restock stop in Big Spring, Texas. And we stopped at a Costco, and they were out of water and out of practically everything else we needed. And we began to get inklings that it was going to be impossible to resupply the van. And we were looking at lockdowns in my hometown, and we thought about, okay, well, can we make it to Dallas? And if we did, there would be facing an empty refrigerator. So we decided to kind of be planful about how we were going to sort of pause things and pick it up when it got safer to do so. We had to pause on March 22nd or 24th. I don't remember exactly. We picked up again on September 24th. Ran for about a month and had to pause again because the numbers east of Texarkana were looking bad. And then we finally resumed the last third of the run on March 2nd of 2021 and made it to the coast.
Wow. And pardon my ignorance here, when you're marking an event like this or a feat like this, is it days, hours, just miles done? Are there differences in how you mark it and how is somebody officially marking it?
Mentally, I look forward to the next big town, whatever comes, actually the next town of any sort. Usually what that means is, gas stations, lodging, that sort of thing. And when you're out there in the middle of nowhere, that takes on a special significance. In terms of documenting the run, we had originally set out to document it more thoroughly when we thought that there would be records that we might bump up against. When we found out that on this particular route that no one had actually done Disney to Disney before, we relaxed a little bit, but still kept marking our progress. We have a live GPS tracker that kept track of where I was every moment. I had 2 GPS watches that have my workouts recorded. And we also, per the recommendation of an organization called Fastest Known Time, took timestamp selfies next to unique landmarks. So in terms of marking our progress, very, very hard to cheat on a route like that if you have to be at a certain place at a certain time, and the only way you can get there is to run. So we documented our progress using those tools.
I guess what I also meant was, in terms of the time break that you had to take because of COVID, do you count just the time running then for your, the way you clocked it?
We did tot up the total time we spent running. I believe between the 2 Disneys, it was 88 days, and it was 90 coast to coast. Records organizations, especially Fastest Known Time, care about the entire time it took you, especially if there's no starting gun. That's typically where people like fastestknowntime.com pick up. It's elapsed time. So if you're visiting the bathroom, you're still on the clock. If you're taking a lunch break, you're on the clock. We realized that while this might be the fastest known time from Disney to Disney, since it's the first, it'll be a record that's easy to break for anyone that's serious about it. It really will only take them about 3 months to do it at my pace, and many people are faster than I am. So we take comfort in the fact that we drew some attention to type 1 and exercise, and that this was a bit of a media event because it was the first.
Yeah, definitely.
That helped us get the word out.
And I don't mean to take anything away from it. I'm just trying to figure out. So do you have to count it, Don, February to April? Or do you just count the time running, I guess? Do you have to count the COVID break? Right back to Don answering that question. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Gvoke HypoPen. And our endo always told us if you use insulin, you need to have emergency glucagon on hand as well. Low blood sugars are one thing. We're usually able to treat those with fast-acting glucose tabs or juice, but a very low blood sugar can be very frightening, which is why I'm glad there's a different option for emergency glucagon. It's Gvoke HypoPen. Gvoke HypoPen is pre-mixed and ready to use with no visible needle. You pull off the red cap and push the yellow end onto bare skin and hold it for 5 seconds. That's it. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. Now back to Don, and he's talking about how the timing of this amazing run is recorded.
Personally, I count the whole time. It is what it is.
I have a few more questions about the run itself, but I want to go back and talk to you about, you mentioned the 30 years you spent not really exercising. It's hard to believe, but when you were diagnosed, you were told it was too dangerous. Is that really what your doctor said? Tell us about that.
I was diagnosed in 1972, and people who are considerably younger than me may not realize that glucose meters weren't invented or weren't publicly available until the early 1980s. My first glucometer was this massive brick-shaped thing that I got in, I think it was either 1982 or 1983. Prior to that, really the only way of telling what your blood sugar was, not what it is, but what it was with a urine test. And all that really told you was past history. It was justifiable, given the circumstances, that if there was no way other than a trip to a hospital to have a glucose test done, that if you couldn't tell how low your blood sugar was and you were feeling awful and faint and, on the verge of passing out, that maybe it wasn't so good to do things that caused a drop in blood sugar. Problem was that, after 30 years, glucose meters had been around for a while at that point, and I didn't change the advice I was following. So that's on me. But I think a lot of people, even with glucose meters, are justifiably scared that if they can't stay on top of a severe drop in their blood sugar, that maybe this is not for me to do. We face challenges during these long runs. And because I'm type 1, like a lot of you out there, I got to face the same challenges. And many of them aren't easy, but I just keep thinking about the turn I almost took down the road to being visually impaired and having circulatory problems. And I'm just so glad that I went ahead and faced those risks.
Wow. Do you remember what it was that made you think, I've got to move forward with exercise? I've got to change this?
Yes.
And please tell me as you answer that the first thing you did wasn't a marathon.
Not a marathon. It was in 2004. I had gone to see my retina specialist who had been monitoring proliferative retinopathy in my left eye. And it had come to the point where he recommended a laser retinopathy treatment. I think those are deprecated these days. I think they use an anti-inflammatory injection now. But back then, the recommended treatment was laser treatment of the blood vessels in the eye that were leaking. And it left me with a blind spot. And I asked my retina specialist at the time, well, what does the future look like for me? And he basically said, well, you'll have more blind spots if you don't do anything. And I had already made a decision that year that after finding I was short of breath going up the stairs, that I wanted to be healthy. I signed up for a 5K turkey trot. And it was like a punch in the gut to get that laser retinopathy treatment after I had made the decision to be healthy. I made myself a promise that if I could just have a do-over, I would do it over. And I've just kind of not looked back since then. I actually have a little bit of a concern that for many years that once I got to the point where I finished a run across the U.S., that I would turn around and go, okay, now what? and not run anymore. But I've taken up swimming, so hopefully that'll help.
And I'm trying to do the quick math here, Don, but how old were you in 2004?
I think I was in my early 40s. I don't know the exact age. I think it was 42, but I'm not sure about that.
I only ask because you didn't change your mind when you were 22, right? You didn't start exercising at a super young age. I think 42 is still very young, but it's not, you're not a kid. You're making decisions a little bit later in life, and the results are phenomenal. I mean, I just can't believe that.
I actually think it was something of an advantage to start once I had a gray beard, because I had lower expectations of myself. And I think as you push the distance, it's good to remember that not everything in life is achieved by going all out. I progressed slowly to longer and longer distances. Probably around 2011, I had gotten used to running marathons, and I realized I wasn't getting any faster. There was an ultra, I think it was a 50K in Fort Worth that came up on the radar. And I thought to myself, well, that's only 5 miles longer than a marathon. Let's try it. I did fine. There were only 400 people in that race that signed up. I think it was like 25,000 or something that signed up for the marathon, but only 400 for the ultra. And it was kind of a nice feeling to realize that, the bulk of the work was behind me. And really now it was just seeing how far I could go. And I began to realize that, if I sort of run my own pace, which is relatively slow, that pushing the distance was a more interesting challenge to me than trying to run faster and risk injury.
By the way, as a mom, I have to say, is that a Dexcom beep? You good? We need to take care of anything?
We're good. I had lunch just a little while ago, so it's probably complaining about that.
I'm sorry if that's a rude thing to say.
No. We're all tribe.
Thank you. So let's talk. I have some questions from my listeners, but let me ask you a couple more Disney questions.
Sure.
There's this great video of you finishing at Disney World. What was that like? And did you know that they knew you were coming and were going to be celebrating like that?
I knew absolutely nothing about it. Right. We actually were talking just before, at our last aid stop, before we ran up to the Magic Kingdom, about what would happen when we got there. We had thought, okay, well, we don't want to disturb the Disney guys. We realize that's private property. It's not officially part of the run because we had made a rule for ourselves that we would not run on private property. And when we got to the Contemporary, security guard said, "Oh, are you the runner?" And my first thought was, "Oh, God, we're going to get escorted off the property." And they knew we were coming. And I said, "Yeah, I'm the runner." And he said, "Okay, well, hang tight. We got some friends waiting for you at the gate." Ran over to the gate, and there were probably 200 or 300 Disney cast members waiting, all cheering. There were people lining their run up to the gate. And when we got there, Melissa Valaquette, the president of Walt Disney World, presented me with a custom Mickey Mouse cap that said Disneyland to Disney World, and escorted me into the park and said, have fun, do what you want to do, we'll pay for it.
Wow.
And I had an ice cream cone and I rode It's a Small World, and I had 15 more miles to go. So I went back and finished running, but it was the most magical time in the world. I can't thank those guys enough. That was this awesome surprise party.
Do you know who told them? I mean, we all knew you were going.
Some sneaky person, I don't know. I actually, many months ago, had contacted Disney Media Relations to see if anyone had run from Disneyland to Disney World. And then they kind of went radio silent for a while. I suspect that what happened was that they waited for a while to see if it looked like I was going to finish. And then when it looked like it was actually going to happen, they're like, okay, this is something noteworthy, and let's be there and let's make his dreams come true. It was amazing. The second finish line on the coast in India Atlantic was almost as awesome, because I really mostly expected my bio dad and his wife to be there, my brother and his wife, and we would all take some selfies and celebrate the fact that we got there. And there was a bit of a crowd, and the deputy mayor of India Atlantic was there and had swag and other things, and somebody brought me a Red Bull. So and I needed that, so it was pretty awesome, and to have the two finish lines was kind of a bonus.
And just to be clear, when you said after Disney World you had 15 miles to go, was that the same day that you did that?
Yes, the same day. Our plan was to stop in Kissimmee right at the turn to 192, which heads toward the coast. I think we finished that day at 31 miles. Originally, when we didn't think there was going to be much of a fuss at Disney, we were hoping to do more like 34, 36, something like that. But we actually got in about 50K that day, and I was pretty happy about that.
The next question from my Facebook group is about how did you manage blood sugar along the way? I know there must have been lots of ups and downs and things like that, but can you give any advice, especially for the athletes who are listening, in just on, how you manage such an endurance feat?
Couple of things. One is that it's important to be aware that while cardio can make you insulin sensitive, pushing it to the point where stress becomes a factor, the stress hormones can actually reverse that effect a little bit and make you a little more insulin resistant. I like to tell people that that's your body pumping you full of hormones and energy so you can run away from the cheetah. So that's an effect to be aware of. My wife, Leslie, who managed all the food, made sure I got in enough calories every day, did a good job of watching my sugars on Dexcom Follow. So generally speaking, when I got to the van, she knew what kind of fuel I needed and had it ready. In terms of using the settings on my T-Slim, the tandem pump, I had to run it in sleep mode most of the time because I was fairly insulin sensitive during the day, and unless blisters or heat were bothering me, the biggest challenge was keeping my sugar up. I found that even in exercise mode, it was dosing me a little too much. So I would say if you're going to run 100 milers, 200 milers, that sort of thing, think about sleep mode and not just exercise mode. That was something we had to do.
The same person wants to know how many pairs of shoes you went through.
If you count just the ones that I wore out, it would be 7. I had a custom pair of shoes equipped with Velcro all the way around the top, and sand gaiters, similar the ones I used in the Mojave, that I put on for the beach. So that would be the 8th pair. So 8 pairs of shoes, including the ones for the beach.
Oh my gosh. Another question here is, what did your training schedule look like? How do you train for something like this?
I have a hilly 50K route that I typically do training runs on. I borrowed it from some cycling friends of mine who wanted a route with a lot of hills in it. And I typically tried to go out and run that in every kind of weather that I could. During training, I would take the rest day in between training days, but every once in a while I would run 3 or 4 days in a row, do the same 50K route. Generally speaking, I didn't train above a 50K distance because I didn't expect to do more than 35 miles a day on the Transcon. For Texas, we trained a little bit longer per day, and For Iowa, we were training like 50 miles a day, but there's just no way for me that I could keep keep up a distance beyond 35 miles a day for 100 days.
When you're doing something like this, do you try to eat the same stuff all the time? Are you able to vary things? How does that work for you?
I tended to gravitate towards some things that I liked. We also paid a lot of attention to trying to get things into me that had protein, so that my muscles could rebuild a little bit better overnight. So we ate a lot of hummus, a lot of yogurt, chicken salad, that sort of thing. I got to a point where I didn't want hummus. We ran out of chicken salad before I hated it. Yogurt, if I was dehydrated, it tended to taste kind of pasty to me, but we would start putting those little mandarin orange cups that you can get at the grocery store. We would put those into yogurt to make it a little wetter, and it was a great fuel source. I mean, it's protein, fat, a little bit of sugar. So I ate a lot of that. If I needed carbs, we'd throw in an Oreo or a Nutter Butter or something like that. But we really paid attention to trying to get the calories into me. I went through about probably 4,000, 5,000 calories a day.
Wow.
If any less than that, I was losing weight.
Wow. Did you have to treat lows along the way, a lot of them, or were you able to kind of manage by what you were eating and with the sleep mode, as you said?
Mostly we managed by eating and with sleep mode. We didn't run into a lot of lows on this run. And by that, I don't mean to suggest that we had a lot of highs. On the days that were upwards of 35 miles, I tended to have more persistent highs until I went to sleep. And then, of course, my sugars dropped very rapidly at that point. We had previously had a run-in with a severe low back in 2019 when I ran across Texas. There was a section between Kermit and Odessa that was very stressful to me, and my sugars had run high the whole day. It was a 41-mile stretch, and I basically kind of burned up my glycogen, was under fueling because my sugar was running high from stress. And then that night when I went to sleep, my sugar dropped to 20. And for anyone here who's not from the U.S., that's probably 1 millimole or something very close to that. Yeah. And was wavering in and out of consciousness. And my wife had a glucagon rescue kit that she used on me, and I ate God knows how many carbs before my sugar came up. We learned to be careful about that and to pay a lot of attention to whether the highs were due to overfueling or stress. And if it was stress, we treated it very differently than we did, overeating. Stress, we typically found that dosing just a little and actually taking on food, even though my sugar was high, was the best way to get my body to sort of calm down. Otherwise, I would just run high until I fell asleep, and then I'd drop like a rock.
Wow. I'm laughing with this question because we debated in the group, but this question came up. Ask him what he's going to do next. Do you have another goal?
That's a good question. I've had my eye on a solo swim around Key West. That's not as amazing as it sounds from a type 1 perspective. My good friend Karen Lewin was actually the second type 1 to solo swim around Key West. I don't remember the name of the first one. So, but I would be joining a club of people I'd be very happy to be a member of. That's a 12.5-mile swim. During the COVID pause, I switched to swim training because I needed to do something to break up the run training a little bit. It was getting monotonous without knowing when I'd start again.
Yeah.
So I've got that swim on my mind to do after this. But at the same time, I think I need to take some time off, recover, just relax and sort of let my body sort of recalibrate to what normal life is like.
Wow. And I have to ask you, you mentioned, they said Disney World, come on in and do whatever you want. It's on us. You had an ice cream cone and you did Small World. Small world, Don. Why?
I have some really very pleasant memories from my childhood of riding that ride. It's always been there, and it's quiet. And one of the things that I found on the out on the run was that I would get something. A friend of mine called it sympathetic nervous system overload. Basically, being 2 or 3 feet from traffic for hours on end, got to the point where I was kind of jumpy at loud noises. So we really loved It's a Small World. And that was one of the reasons we chose that. And it was our favorite ride anyway. So
I love it. Hey, before I let you go, any advice for people listening who are, they're running 5Ks or they're maybe just starting exercise with type 1 and, not planning to do what you've done, but a little nervous, but a little excited about exercise. What do you tell people like that?
If you have a bad day, it's just a bad day. Don't kick yourself for mistakes. Don't kick yourself for things that don't go the way you expect. Look at it as a chance to learn something. Even a bad blood sugar day is a chance to alter your plans, change something in the way that you manage your sugars during exercise. But above all, don't give up.
I said that was my last question, but something else just occurred to me, Don. Have you ever gone back to the eye doctor or anybody from kind of your previous life?
I have, and things have been stable so far. We're going to kind of thoroughly check things out to make sure nothing's changed after the run, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, but they've got to be so excited to see what you've done.
My endocrinologist is pretty excited. I'm hoping to see him here in about a month or so, and we'll check in with each other and see what we can tell from the numbers.
Wow. Don, thank you so much for spending so much time with me. I really appreciate you coming on. Congratulations. And I got to tell you, I think what you should do next is rest up and put your feet up for a little while. But I know that's not going to happen. But thanks for being here.
That sounds like a great idea. I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much for your time.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Simms.
More information about Don in the show notes or at diabetes-connections.com. Linked up to all of his amazing accomplishments. I'm still a little speechless. What a thing to do, just to think of doing these incredible goals and getting them done. I know that people like Don will say, well, it's just a matter of training and then you put one foot in front of the other. But my goodness, it's pretty amazing stuff. Innovations coming up in just a moment. We're going to talk about what looks like a pretty big move from Medtronic in terms of longer wear pump insets. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And I get a lot of questions about Dexcom coverage for people on Medicare. Why not? It's not as though you stop needing a CGM the minute you turn 65. The good news is that the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitoring system is covered for Medicare for patients who meet the coverage criteria. If you have either type 1 or type 2 diabetes and intensively manage insulin, you may be covered. To find out more about what that means and if you qualify, check out Dexcom.com/G6-Medicare. You're going to want to talk to your doctor, and you may even be able to get your Dexcom supplies at the pharmacy, saving time and money. Learn more. Again, that link, I'll put this in the show notes too. It's Dexcom.com/G6-Medicare. In innovations this week, one medical story and one donut story. Let's do the medical one first. Interesting news from Medtronic. They have launched a new line of what's being called insulin infusion hardware. They've launched this in Europe that basically doubles the time you can wear it. So, if you wear an insulin pump, as you listen, you have the inset on your body. It's the way a tubed pump will connect. The Omnipod has this too. It's just a little different because it's kind of hidden in the mechanism. But they all have this way that you insert a needle, the needle comes out, and the cannula stays under the skin with the adhesive and the connector part above the skin. I used to describe it looking like a tiny nicotine patch with a bump on it. They last about 3 days. You're supposed to change them every 2 to 3 days to avoid infection and scarring and clogging and that stuff. But Medtronic says that they have one that will last 7 days. And we talked about this when I spoke to Medtronic's Sean Salmon back in, I want to say October of last year. It was the fall of last year. he mentioned this. He said that the tubing set, is what he called it, would go from 2 to 3 days to 7 days. And he said the way they were doing that, I'll link up the episode so you can listen again, is that it has to do with the way that they filter insulin through the inset. He says that the preservatives in insulin are what causes the site reactions and the clogging and that kind of thing. And they found a way, obviously it's proprietary. He didn't go into too much detail, but they found a way to work around that. This is really interesting. I'm surprised this didn't make a bigger splash. This is a huge deal if it works as well as we would hope, to be able to wear your pump on your body for longer without scarring or issues or that kind of thing. So European friends, if you're using it, you hear about it, talk to your endo about it, let us know how it goes, and we will wait for more information on the Medtronic 7-day inset. And the other story I wanted to bring you in innovations is, I don't know if it's a medical innovation, but it sure could be helpful. The fabulous people at TCOYD, Take Control of Your Diabetes, released a video that many of you sent to me, and it was just fantastic. I wanted to share it. It is how to eat 3 donuts and stay in range. And this is Dr. Jeremy Pettis, Dr. Steve Edelman, and they basically have a demonstration, but it's really a kind of a comparison of how they would each do it. And they show you, they eat 3 donuts, they take you through, they're using a Dexcom to kind of show the results. It is Afrezza, the inhaled insulin, kind of versus timing of traditional insulin. I won't spoil the whole thing. It's fun to watch. I think they do an incredible job, as always, of breaking down kind of complex thoughts and making them user-friendly, I'll call it. And they have such a great sense of humor. I really, really enjoy their stuff. So if you haven't ever watched any TCOID videos, they have a ton of them. And their conferences are always a really good time too. So I will link that up in the show notes. But I would imagine you could Google how to eat 3 donuts and stay in range. And probably it'll pop up pretty easily. Before I let you go, we did have our quarterly endocrinology visit. I almost thought about putting it off because there's really nothing going on right now. We're kind of in a groove. We're just re-entering some parts of life. Knock on wood, as you're listening to this, my whole family is vaccinated. Benny is 2 weeks past his. I think I'll be past 2 weeks past my last one when this episode goes live. Yeah, I will be. And Benny has really re-entered more of the real world very recently. As I've mentioned before, he got a job. He's back with the wrestling team. He's not yet going to school. He's staying virtual, but he's back on the high school team. And, we've had some blood sugar issues, as you would expect whenever you're going back to a sport after a long time not, but he's managing them really well. So I only share the endo appointment because, of course, we've known this guy for 14 plus years. He's taken his family to Disney World for the first time, and that's later this year. And that's what we spent most of the appointment talking about. My tips and tricks for Disney World. We did have that episode last week, but his kids don't have type 1, so it wasn't that relevant, and he didn't have to listen to the podcast episode. And I realized I haven't been to Disney, since COVID, certainly. And I know that there have been some changes. So I'm fascinated to see. Apparently, FastPass Plus has been eliminated during COVID, which was like my lifeblood when I go there. I get those well in advance. Listen to how excited I'm sounding just talking about it. But I get them in advance. We refresh 600 times a day and get all the rides we want. I mean, it's really, there's a science to it. It's a little bit of madness to it too. But it sounds like I'm going to have to relearn everything because it sounds like they're going to make a lot of changes when they really start opening up more. Although Disney World has been open really for months and months and months. But, when they start letting the bigger crowds back in. So that was fun. I love our endo. I feel really fortunate that we have the relationship with him that we do. And the visits are now me kind of sitting in the corner. You know me, I can't stay quiet. But I do very little. It's really just a conversation between him and Benny, and I feel really fortunate about that. All right, classic episode coming up later this week. As always, thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you very much for listening. Hey, do me a favor, share the show. If you enjoy it, you think this is good information, if it's valuable or helpful to you in any way, please tell somebody else in the diabetes community about it. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the word about podcasts, and I'd really appreciate that. All right, I'll see you back here in a couple of days. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Simms Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.